Hello, everybody. It's Candice Horbacz. We are here on Chatting with Candice. I have Daniel Maté joining me. Did I say that right, Maté?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Everyone mispronounces my name all of the time too, so I always
Is
like.
your name Hungarian?
It's Polish and it's my husband, so I just took it on. It took me a while. Like
Gotcha.
I didn't take it for like 3 years. So I'm like, I don't want to have to tell everyone how to say and spell my name, but then when you have kids, it's
Yeah.
you want to have the same last name.
Yeah, well, so actually you said it exactly perfectly the way Hungarians would, mate. We live in Canada where we say pasta instead of pasta. Now I live in New York, so I would never say pasta. Ass kicked on the street. But because of that, it's become mate over the years, just, but we definitely answer to mate.
Okay, yeah, mine's technically Horbacz,
Yes.
as a Polish woman told me, but I'm like, everyone says it a different way, so however you say it, I'll answer. Like, I'll get the general idea. Yep. So, I am so excited that you actually came in person for this. I think the conversation is just so much more interesting when you can, like, sit across the table from somebody, and this book that you wrote with your father is a beast. I love it, but I'm not gonna lie, when I first came in, I was super intimidated. Was it that intimidating to start the writing process?
More for him than for me.
Mhm.
I mean, look, I have to be clear off the bat. This is his baby,
Mhm.
and I was the midwife.
Mhm.
And together we pushed it out into the world. He's been, to push the metaphor one last time, pregnant with it for maybe 11, 12 years, been wanting to write a book this big in terms of scope. Now, believe it or not, our first draft was twice the length.
Whoa.
But for me, the intimidating thing wasn't so much the size of it, because when I read his book proposal originally before I came on board, I was excited about how ambitious it was. And I would have been happy if it had been longer, except no one would have read it, and also it probably wouldn't have been as well. It just wouldn't have been as tight, I think, and I think we said everything we needed to say in the 500 pages. The intimidation happened in other aspects of the process, but I don't know that the word intimidated is one I would actually use. Challenged, pushed, confronted, certainly. The spiritual teacher Ram Dass said, if you think you're so enlightened, go spend a week with your parents. If you think you're so mature, write a book with your father. Your famous father. That it for both of us. It was a full contact, ego cross training and relationship yoga kind of experience. It really took something, and we really got through the other side of it quite different than when we started.
So, I guess how long was that journey? Because I'd imagine it's super cathartic to do with a parent. Like, no matter what the relationship is, there's always little wounds that we have from parenting, especially our generation, because they didn't have access to as much parenting information, or maybe there also is the flip side of that where there's almost too much information, right? So then you second guess your instincts. So it's like this weird dichotomy that we have with parenting. But I think we could all relate to, if we had to do a project that big with our parent, that it would certainly bring certain things to surface that maybe we thought we had healed. I guess my question is, with how long it took, like how long did it take, and do you feel like there is a point where you achieve ultimate healing, or is it constantly evolving with a parent?
So, fantastic multi-part questions, and I'll try and how long did it take? He had been plugging away and starting and stopping, and at one point he completely quit, and he sent back the book advance he had because he just was like, I can't do this, it's beyond me. And that had been about 6 or 7 years. And then he had a brainwave, came up with a new title. The original title was going to be Toxic Culture, How Capitalism Makes Us Sick, which, good luck selling that one. But also it was too negative. It didn't point towards the healing that the book is really about. He got the brainwave to call it The Myth of Normal. That was in 2018. He wrote a book proposal, which he then sent to me for my comments. That's when I came on board, because I said to him, there's a lot of good stuff in here. You need my help to shape this. And I can't just be your editor this time, because I had kind of in the shadows before done tinkering with his stuff. But I was like, no, I'm going to have to come out into the light and actually really help you shape the story of this. I'm a dramatist. I'm a musical theater writer. I'm not a doctor or a therapist. So telling the story and making this argument in the most persuasive way to the most number of people, especially the people who don't already know his work and who maybe haven't thought about trauma in terms of themselves. I'm sure we'll get into that. So that was 2018, and we started writing it in earnest towards the end of 2019. after we sort of signed the contract, and took us about 2.5 years to write. Now, in terms of what that did for us, what's interesting is that this book was the first book in a 2-book contract that we signed with Penguin Random House. The second book is based on a workshop that we had already been doing together, quite separately from this, since 2016, called Hello Again, A Fresh Start for Parents and Their Adult Children. And that's going to be the next book, and we're about to start writing that one. And far be it from me to pretend like ultimate healing is something I even believe in, much less that we've achieved. I don't know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
There's benchmarks of healing. There's, mile markers, you could say. There's moments where you realize, oh, we're at a new altitude now. That thing that used to be a thing doesn't seem to be such a thing anymore. Or that pebble in my shoe or that stone in my heart has moved, and I have more space to let you be you and allow me to be me. Well, that's a sign that some healing has happened. And then there's the next thing. I don't see how this relationship could be otherwise. And I can talk about what makes the parent-adult-child relationship so unique, if you like. But for us, just to sort of put a bow on this question, it certainly took us from one place and fast-tracked us to another. A lot of healing happened, or at least a lot of growth happened.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not precious about the sort of the language, but it had to. And what was nice was that the professional collaboration, which again, I don't recommend to everybody, and not everyone's going to do it. I mean, maybe you build a fence with your dad, maybe you tend to a garden with your mother, or the other way around. Some people don't want to have anything to do with their parents. You got to figure out what your boundaries are. But doing this meant that we had to deal with boundaries and expectations and points of view about each other that we hadn't had to before. Why? Because otherwise writing was impossible. Because it wasn't about us, it was about this, and it was about the people who were going to read it and the change we were committed that the book make in the world. So we had something bigger than our thick skulls, something that was at stake.
Right.
And I think healing actually responds to turning up the heat a little bit and being like, okay, enough with the stagnation, enough with the same pattern over and over again. There must be a way out of this. Like, in the first Star Wars movie, when they're in the trash compactor and it's getting smaller and smaller, and finally I figure out how they do it, but they stop it and they are able to get out. Like, sometimes that pressure makes a diamond. And so this was a case where there were certain ways that I react to him that just became clear. This is totally dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I have a case, that's telling language, right?
Yeah.
Even if I have a legitimate grievance or am trying to set a boundary, I'm stuck reacting the same way I did when I was 6, and now I'm 40, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
And he's getting close to 80. The absurdity of it shows up. Similarly, me tolerating being spoken to in certain ways, or me taking on certain stresses that are not mine, that are his, me trying to placate him, or him, overriding my boundaries and requests or whatever. He had to, for himself, see if I need this guy to write this book with me.
Mm-hmm.
And not strictly because of the professional thing, but it's like the professional collaboration gave us a scaffolding on which to grow some new branches of the relationship, so that now, without the professional collaboration, we have those muscles. The plant is that much stronger. As far as what you said about our particular generation, I'm flattered that you consider me in yours. I'm not younger than me. They did have a lot of parenting advice, and a lot of it was very bad. I mean, Dr. Spock was the go-to parenting guru of, I don't know when he was writing, the 50s, 60s. And that was, let your child cry it out type stuff. And we write about it in the book,
Mm-hmm.
and the lasting influence of that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also another factor about that particular generation, is that they were kind of uniquely messed up, through no fault of their own.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them, depends where they were growing up, but they were the children of the World War II parents.
Mm-hmm.
So, my father was born during the Holocaust in Hungary, a Jewish baby, so that's clearly going to be a completely abnormal and horrific and very dangerous. I mean, he almost died.
Mm-hmm.
Infancy. But if you were living in the Midwest, if you're living in some corn-fed part of America, you had maybe a father who came home having seen horrors that he'll never talk about, soothing himself with drink. You had a mother who was stuck in very rigid traditional gender roles and suppressing all of her emotions. I mean, I'm just being stereotypical.
Right.
But stereotypes come from somewhere.
Exactly.
And so then these kids grow up in the 60s, Kennedy's New Frontier era, all kinds of new possibilities, Cold War instability, the social revolutions of the 60s, all these things pulling them away from their parents, all these ways to rebel against their parents. And then they get to the 70s and realize, oh shit, I got to make a living. So then they do whatever they do, and everyone, we end up in the yuppie 80s and whatever. What I'm saying is, being born in the 1970s and 80s, and I can't even imagine what it's been like to be born since, we were the inheritors of a lot of shit that was not ours. And that was very difficult, I think, to sort through, and that was confusing for a lot of us. So we got a lot of mixed messages, a lot of talk that didn't line up with actions, a lot of hidden emotions that weren't speakable and weren't spoken about. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so many places I want to go with that. I guess starting with the unique relationship that kids have with their parents. So it's really interesting because my husband can do something and I'm so much more quick to forgiveness with him than I am with my mother.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of work on that relationship and it's continuous. So that's why I kind of asked your healing question, because for me, I don't think that there's ever a point where that relationship is 100% pure, pristine, and there's like nothing else that kind of needs to be turned over, because that parenting dynamic never goes away. And there's like this weird shift that has to happen between who's kind of the dominant one or in charge, or maybe that agency that comes to play, and whether you're in a healthy home and that comes later, or you're maybe in more of a dysfunctional home and then that agency shows up a lot earlier. Like you have to kind of be the parent because there is no parent, which was my case.
Which itself is a source of trauma.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you can get to a place where I've done a lot of forgiveness work with her, but there are certain things, and I've heard you kind of speak on this, it's like certain things will give me a visceral response. And I'm like, something still needs to kind of be lifted and lightened up there. So why am I so much slower to forgiveness and so less gracious with her than I am with other relationships?
Well, probably because she's a uniquely horrible person.
Right. Right. And someone's like, yes, I knew it. No. You know what I mean? And at some point that would have been my response, right? Like my anger is justified and it's righteous anger, and how dare she? And that is not a healthy place. And you're never going to get,
But there's truth in all of it. Everything gets distorted. It's like a house of mirrors. But every illusion, there's some truth hidden in it. My anger is justified. Maybe your anger is out of proportion right now. Maybe your anger has nothing to do with what's going on right now. Maybe your mother is completely incapable of absorbing your anger, and the way you're unleashing it on her will not yield any of what you actually are committed to or want. So we could say that your anger is misplaced or misguided, or at least kind of out to lunch, because it's totally automatic. It's not like you wake up in the morning and be like, I think I want to flip out at my mother today.
Right.
Like a child. That said, you are angry about something. It's just not happening right now. It's a long-standing grievance. And underneath every grievance, there's grief that we haven't processed. And we try to sort it out through the actual, we need to problem solve this thing that's happening now, but it's not about this thing that's happening right now. We're seeing what's happening now through the filter of all of the unprocessed emotions. Now, why is that the case in this relationship? It can't be otherwise. Even in the best case scenario, I can't imagine, because this book is called Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. So we put a lot of emphasis on the context in which everything is happening. It's not just that a lot more people are sick these days and trauma is rampant. There's a reason for it. We live in a culture that produces it in a sense, not on purpose, but as a matter of course through all kinds of different mechanisms at every different level of society, from political to cellular. But just take the relationship and put it in like an ideal kind of vacuum. It's really a weird, unique relationship. There is no other relationship like this. Think about it. When you two met, there's no one else you can say this about in your life. When you met this person, she was a fully grown adult, capable of making choices, who had had a range of experiences, had eaten many meals in her life, and had seen things and done things. And she was a person. She had a name, she had a personality, a biography, all of that. She was in a relationship with somebody who co-produced you, or she wasn't in that relationship, but that's still a relationship. She was dealing with her own stresses, but she was either an adult or close to it. You were a non-thing. I mean, you were, but at the very first moment, you were a couple of gametes meeting. You didn't have any choice in the matter. You weren't there to make the choice. In a sense, the parent has the choice to say, I'm going to bring this person into the world. Obviously, there are unexpected babies, but at some level, there is volition. There is saying, okay, this baby's happening. There's an invitation in most cases. Okay, come into the world. Well, the baby doesn't have that choice. That's number one. Number two, you didn't choose each other. Now, you could say cosmically, karmically. Sure, we can say that's a nice story, and I'm willing to go with that. It has its uses to think of it that way. But also, no, like you really didn't. My dad didn't have any inkling. I turned out very differently than my parents were expecting. And I'm sure they turned out very differently than I was, quote unquote, expecting, even though I didn't have cognitive expectations. We are all born into the world as an expectation for a certain kind of environment, which is actually an unstressed, fully emotionally attuned, emotionally available, communitarian, like not just a nuclear family, but if you look at our evolution has prepared us to expect to be born in a much larger context where the parents are supported and it's not all on them. And they're not struggling and striving to make a living in a dog-eat-dog economy, right? And also, I came into this world probably not expecting that my father would have survived a genocide and be carrying all the stresses and the darkness of that into the very first moment he held me. I felt it. I couldn't not. Of course, I didn't clock it. I didn't have a mind. I didn't have words for it. But my nervous system was conditioned by his nervous system, and his nervous system was conditioned by things that happened a long time ago before mine, plus things that happened before he was born. So there's another unique thing, is that one of you didn't only just procreate and create the other, but you conditioned the other. The parent was the home was the formative crucible in which your nervous system, my nervous system, grew. So when you say you have a visceral reaction, you know what the literal meaning of visceral is?
No.
Well, your viscera are your guts.
Okay.
That's the word for them, the technical word. So a visceral reaction is literally in your guts, which is a crucial part of your nervous system, which means it's not even about your attitude towards your mom. It's not even about your behavior, at least not primarily. The first thing that happens is your nervous system remembers something. It remembers stress. It remembers anger that you weren't able to express back then. It remembers an intense power dynamic. Because here's yet another unique thing about this relationship. For a long time, the power dynamic was completely lopsided, and the responsibility dynamic, the flip side, right? They had every responsibility to keep me alive, keep you alive, shield us against all kinds of dangers, and we had no power. Now, that's as nature intends it. In a perfect world, that's a good thing. And there's space for the child to grow into their own power in the loving, calm, trusting crucible of a secure attachment relationship, you could say. But most of us don't get that. Mm-hmm. So we experienced a lot of injustice, at least to our little sensibilities, a lot of indignities. My boundaries were violated. Things weren't fair. Words didn't mean what they sounded like they meant. I was taught that it meant something, but then your actions, your behavior belies that completely.
And that incoherence creates a lot of distrust.
Hugely. And sometimes it can create actual mental dysfunction. The world doesn't, I have a bipolar disorder, not full-blown like extreme, but like, hypomania, cyclothymia, it's somewhere, it's mild, but it's consequential. And I'm clear that's not genetic. My sensitivity is genetic. But growing up in a home where things could flip from this to this, just like that, and having to bridge those two and having to always be able to predict and control and whatever, and getting a lot of positive affirmation and validation from a reinforcement, I should say, from being really up and really smart and really excited and really verbal on the one hand, to the exhaustion of that, collapsing, being depressed, being sad, being sick, being one way I could get taken care of. Well, you're setting the template for a little brain that's still forming.
Yeah, that's so true.
So that's true for all of us, and it manifests in very different ways for everybody. And the book, I think, goes through a lot of the different kinds of pathways and outcomes. But what we have in common is that this relationship, unlike all the others in your life, is where all that stuff happened. It's the room where it happened, to quote a song from Hamilton. That's where the action was, for better and for worse. So now here you are, you're still the same person. You're still carrying that in your nervous system. Now that stuff can get triggered in your marriage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your fear of abandonment, your anger at injustice, all of our issues do get triggered.
Oh, it shows up in your attachment style to pretty much everyone. And you can go through it and you'll pinpoint it and say, well, that's me.
The difference being, that's not the person who started it all. Now, when I say started it all, I don't mean to use blaming language. It's not about blame. It's just a fact. They were there. The forensics, their fingerprints are on the...
They participated.
They participated, not on purpose. It doesn't require that we blame them at all. But we do have to it's really about cutting ourselves a break and realizing it's a miracle I can be in the same room as this person. Of course it's hard for me to separate then from now. But the fact is, then and now are separated by many decades, and I'm a different person. My nervous system has grown, and I'm carrying some residue. So that is just one of the many tricky dynamics. And I'm only talking from the adult-child point of view. I'm not a parent, so I don't know what it is to have an adult child. I'm sure there's a lot of complicated things about updating your operating system to see your child as not a child anymore, and to let go of that parenting role, and to outgrow some of the stale, dysfunctional dynamics that governed the way you parented them, and all the regrets you may have about that, or all the guilt you may have, or all the shame you may have, or all the guilt and shame you're trying not to feel and you're fending off and being defensive about. So you see it it takes all kinds of forms, but the fundamental thing is, Bob Dylan has a great lyric. It's a wonder we can even feed ourselves. And that's how I feel about the adult parent-child relationship. It shouldn't work at all. But, as Paul Simon's saying, the mother and child reunion is only a motion away, which doesn't mean ultimate healing is simple or even worth framing that way. But it does mean there is, like, healing as we define it in this book, is not some ultimate destination. Mm-hmm. It's not a destination. It's a direction. It's not a point on a map. It's sort of a general line, or even just moving in a certain direction, following a certain set of stars. So in any moment, healing is possible. Because anyway, I'll just finish that thought, that in any moment, it's possible to move from fracturedness to wholeness. It's just going to look different in every moment, and we have to be kind of alive and alert to it, and be spontaneous, and kind of ask, okay, what would healing look like in this moment? So, but truly believe me, my dad and I are still figuring it out. In fact, just 5 days ago, we had the second of a 2-part, 3-hour conversation mediated by a mutual friend of ours, and that's what it took, because we could not simply communicate. We were at a place, and we always get to these places before we start a new phase of our collaboration. We're about to start the second book.
Right.
We needed someone to step in. We could, and there was a lot of yelling, and there was frustration, and there was old wounds and grievances and whatever. But by the end, we broke through to, I think, a new paradigm, and I realized a whole lot of new things that feel really good. And so that's just how I measure healing. Is like I said before, there was tension before, now there's some peace.
Yeah, checking in with your body,
Yeah,
I think
sure.
is huge. Honestly, the thing I appreciate the most about you and what your father are doing is how open you guys both are. Like you aren't pretending to be these kind of like sages on a stage where you have everything figured out and you have the idyllic father-son relationship. Like you're like, no, we're real people and we have emotions like everyone else. We've got little wounds like everyone else, but we love each other and we're just kind of by example showing you that there's a better way and there's a path forward as an adult child and
Yeah.
a parent, which is huge because I love that you guys don't avoid the blame game, which I think is a trap. It's so easy to say this is all your fault and no accountability with me and I'm just going to be here stuck for the rest of my life versus saying I'm also an adult and I can make decisions for myself. So your bad behavior or parenting or whatever it is, your trauma
Your
can't
limitations.
can't right. It can't be an excuse for your behavior at some point, which I love is like that accountability
Can I
factor.
tell you a funny story?
Yeah, of course.
So I was saying to you before the show, and I think you know this, you said you've watched a few episodes. I have this new podcast called Let's Get Lyrical with Carice and Daniel. Carice Van Houten from Game of Thrones is my co-host, and we talk about song lyrics. It's just one of my passions. I'm a songwriter myself. And we had my dad on as our first live stream guest. And the topic was trauma, illness, and healing songs. So he brought in a few, but we kind of surprised him with some. And I played him like a Kendrick Lamar song about healing that just blew his freaking mind. But early in the show, I played him Because of You by Kelly Clarkson, which he had never heard. And I'd never really listened to closely. And we had this on-camera, like live disagreement about it. And I got really snippy with him. I should have just let him finish his thought, but I got really triggered. And of course, when you're triggered, who's the one who's carrying the ammo? The trigger is the smallest part of the gun. We often throw that word around, not realizing, well, if I'm triggered, that's mostly on me.
Yeah.
But what he said after the song, he's like, wow, that's really powerful. I didn't know pop music could handle topics like this. And then he said, well, it is kind of a victim mentality. And you know the lyrics, right? Because of you, I never stray too far from the sidewalk. Because of you, I always stay on the safe side so I don't get hurt. Because of you, I not only distrust myself, but everyone around me. Because of you, I'm afraid. And he's like, well, it is kind of a victim mentality it's kind of stuck. And I was like, Dad, I'm going to stop you right there because I'm going to stick up for Kelly Clarkson. Never uttered that sentence in my life because I think she's at a stage in her healing and she needs to be there. And I don't think a pop song or anybody even, and I still have the energy of the sort of righteous indignation, even as I'm telling the story now. We don't want to gaslight ourselves with spiritual, reading, trying to skip to the end of the book. I know I'm supposed to forgive. Therefore, I shouldn't be where I am. Well, she's depicting, a pop song captures a moment, right? She's depicting a moment where she's probably, as Carice said on the show, probably all her life she said, it's because of me. It's my fault that I struggle. I'm such a piece of shit. That's often what we do until we start to follow the trail of traumatic breadcrumbs back to the source and realize this isn't me. This is because of something that happened to me, or as we say in the book, it's because of something that happened inside of me as a result. But it's true in a certain sense that because of who the parent was, including their limitations and the environment in which they were parenting and all of the trauma they were carrying, I absorbed what I absorbed. And I sort of wanted to sort of put a flag in the ground and say, I think it's important to honor that moment and not rush through it when someone can say, it's not me, it was my childhood. And if they can fully feel that and the anger and the grief of that and really grieve that, then there's a chance of saying, okay, and the past is done. And you're not that person now. Or maybe you're still someone, because it's also a legitimate thing to say, I don't want you in my life. There's nowhere in our work are we telling people you should have a relationship with your parents. You need to have a relationship with your adult kids. This is the other nice thing about this relationship. And also it's the tricky thing. It's optional. When you get to be an adult, you don't need each other anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So if you stay in the relationship, now it's on you to make choices, to set and enforce boundaries, and to communicate in a way that has the best chance of that other person, given who they actually are, not your fantasies of who they should be. And this is what we adult kids run into all the time.
Oh my gosh.
Has a likelihood of being able to hear and absorb and act upon. and that's on me. And my tendency is to blame him if I can't say it the way he'll hear it. But actually, I wouldn't do that to anyone else.
100%. You have to, some of the best advice I got was you have to love people where they're at
Yep.
and for who they are, not who you want them to be. So I think we idealize the perfect mom or the perfect dad. And when they fall short, you're like, why can't you just X, Y, Z?
That's
And
one
you're,
of the ways we coped early on, fantasizing.
right. Yes.
I wish daddy would just,
To escape into,
That's right.
The Brady Bunch, essentially. So
Or the Cosby Show, my God.
so is when you can kind of accept them warts and all, then it's a lot less stress because you're not constantly trying to fix. When you're in a state of fixing and wanting, then you can never just appreciate what it is, and it's way more stressful, especially when you have kids and then you're dealing with the grandparent dynamic. You have to kind of let your hands off the rein to some extent, otherwise you're going to drive yourself nuts because there's so many things that you could cherry pick and be like, I don't like how they talk to my kid there. And obviously some things you have to put your foot down and say, no, we're parenting in a very different way.
Well, I think that's where we come to a really important distinction that I always insist on in our workshop. And I think we talk about it, we do, in the healing section of the book. There's a difference between acceptance and tolerance. So you said you have to accept them warts and all. Accepting them warts and all just means getting right with reality. Like stopping the insane activity of saying it shouldn't be the way it is. They should be different. That's crazy. That's literally crazy.
Doing the same thing over and over.
Banging your head against this, but it's brick.
Yeah.
And then you're blaming them for the headache. Enlightenment is things are the way they are. It is what it is. I don't have to like it, but it is. And so let me approach reality as if it is what it is and be responsible for my responses to it and my reactions to it. That's what an adult does. Now, tolerating is different. I could accept, let's say I had a wildly narcissistic parent who still verbally abuses me, or let's say I'm a parent who has a drug addicted kid who has been stealing from them to pay for their habit, or any other situation where you're in a relationship with someone that you love and they behave in ways that are completely unacceptable or intolerable, let's say, to your boundaries. They just violate your boundaries. They make your life miserable. It's one thing to say, I accept that this is who you are right now. This is how you're showing up. But acceptance is not a half moon. It's a full moon. You got to accept, and I have limits. Mm-hmm. Often when we try to accept, we try to just put it out there, be like, let me accept that. I know I got to accept my standards, my responses, my pain, my wounds, my capacity, my bandwidth, and not try to be the Dalai Lama. That's not where I am. And so sometimes for some people, that might look like I can't have you in my life right now. That doesn't mean I'm not accepting you. It means I'm accepting that you are who you are and I am who I am. And this is what needs to happen right now.
Establishing boundaries is huge. And one of the things I've worked on the most and I feel like became a lot easier when I became a parent was putting concrete boundaries because it wasn't about me anymore. It was about my little ones. So I've literally put my mom on a timeout for 30 days. She did something and crossed a boundary that I had kind of expressed to her a few times and it was a repeat offense. And I was like, listen, I love you. I'm going to block you on all of these things right now. I hope that you can kind of sit with this thing that you have done. And when I check back in 30 days, we can talk about it. But I just knew the conversation wasn't going to happen in a sane place for anybody. And there needed to be a consequence. It's almost like a toddler, right? Like, this is my boundary and you crossed it and we'll reconvene after and give you an opportunity for healing and forgiveness there.
Well, the only thing I would question about that is that there's something telling and they said consequences like a toddler. You already told me that there was a role reversal in your relationship.
Yeah.
So you've been parenting her for a long time, which was never healthy for you in the first place.
For sure.
You never should have had to do it. Now, it just may be that the state of your relationship right now is that you need 30 days away. That's not a consequence in the parenting sense of the term.
Right. You would never do that to your kid.
Well, you wouldn't, but also it's not your job to impose punitive, because you're talking about punitive consequences. And it's interesting, another thing I do, which we can talk about if you want, but I do this mental chiropractic thing.
I have that written down. I did want to ask you what that was, what all of that is. Yeah.
I better shut up and let you ask the question.
Yeah.
But, I take walks with people and I help them unkink their minds. Not kink in that sense, but, just sort of straighten out, get unstuck.
Okay.
where we get stuck in thinking a certain way and we can see that it's not helping the situation. So I was walking with a mother, actually, a woman in her 70s, who was stuck in a relationship with her adult daughters, who she said were punishing her by withholding the grandchildren. And she just kept insisting, they're being punitive, they're being punitive, they're being punitive. I said, you can insist on that language if you want, but it's not going to serve you, because you're putting yourself in the role of the child. If what they're doing is hurting you, you can assume they're trying to hurt you, or you could assume they're trying to protect themselves from something, and this is the only way they know how. Now, it might suck for you. You might think it's not proportional, it's not fair. You might have anger about it, but to say they're punishing me is to turn yourself into their victim, which I'm sure is one of the things they resent and one of the things they need to set a boundary about, you know? So the way that we frame things says a lot about how we feel about ourselves. So that's all.
No, 100%. Yeah, it just it's been a long time since I've dished out like a quote consequence. Our relationship has been really great. Not to say it's like perfect.
Well, I will say this: I think it's far preferable. To err on the side of I'm going to set boundaries than err on the side of I'm not going to set boundaries. You know, if that's what it takes to finally, after all these years, learn to set them, I don't think anyone should feel, you know, badly about maybe sometimes being a little, you know, because you're learning to ride a bicycle and you're going to tilt to both sides, but that's the side that as a kid you never got to do. You couldn't say no.
No, I think it's really confusing too to older parents or like now grandparents, because the millennial generation is really focused on introspection and fixing ourselves before we have kids or at the very early stages, so we don't like fuck them up the way that we were fucked up, right? And obviously, right, it's just like why do I do these things? Are they me? Are the way I was parented? A lot of times they say if you like the way that you react to your kid doing something, if it's this really kind of disproportionate emotion, like your kid, like just the other day, my child took a blue crayon and just drew all over the walls, and I just came out and I was like, huh, did you do that, Art? And he's like, yeah. I was like, okay, well, art's for the easel. Let's go wash that up. Just like that, right? No meltdown, not like, what are you doing my paint? Which is what I would have gotten and probably worse. So
you've diffused the charge.
Right. But if I had reacted like, what did you do? Look at my paint. That was because I had probably done something very similar at an age. And that was the response I got. It's imprinted. So it's like this really cool looking glass that you can have as a parent.
You're talking about the generation gap. How old was your mom when she started looking at her trauma and uprooting these patterns in herself and asking herself the kinds of questions you're asking?
Yesterday, maybe.
Maybe tomorrow.
Maybe tomorrow.
You know, it's just a different cultural context, which can, I'm sure, make our generations, because I'm 47, so I can't call myself, I wish I could call myself a millennial, but I'm more of a...
You're almost there.
Gen X,
Yeah.
The Breakfast Club is how I learned about teenagehood. That's my reference point. We grew up in a world that was a lot more complicated in some ways than our parents, but also, especially the millennial generation, is growing up in a world where learning about your trauma and doing something about it early is increasingly invited. And this is like one of the good things about the internet, maybe, you know, that this conversation can be piped into homes, you know, like in the 1980s, people were watching Johnny Carson and The Cosby Show. And these days, people are much more likely to be listening to a podcast about trauma, illness, and healing, or something else that actually touches on something vulnerable and difficult, right? Which I imagine for our parents might be kind of difficult. Like these kids these days, you know, they're all about their boundaries. they're, you know, like what's going on? In my day, we just, you know, put up with our parents.
Right. And it's like, well, I don't know if all of those things were necessarily good. Like telling your kid, unless you're bleeding or dying, leave me alone. That's not a great message to tell a little person.
Yeah, well, there's our title in action, right? The myth of normal. Things that get normalized become invisible. And we just assume that they're natural. But so many of them are not only not natural, they're making us very sick in many different ways. So that's, you know.
100. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's why people, I mean, like you and your father and Joe Dispenza and all of this work being done with epigenetics is so powerful, because it's like if you aren't allowed to express yourself, which a lot of us weren't, feelings were very discouraged because they were inconvenient, then your body stores on to those things. I wanted to ask you, I mean, I've got like pages, but usually I don't even get to them. One of the things I wanted to ask, I was watching this podcast with Jordan Peterson the other day, and it was a clip, and he was talking with his daughter, Michaela, and it was like Jordan, his wife, and Michaela. And I believe the quote was something along the lines of, "We never let you behave in a way that that made us not like you," something like that. And then he's like, "Oh, it was so great. We could take you to restaurants and you would just sit there." And then Michaela was like, "Yeah, my daughter Scarlett is the same way. She can sit at a dinner for 2 hours and not make a peep." And I was like, what does that mean? Behave in a way that I don't like you? Because certainly if my kid's hitting me, that's not allowed. That's not okay. So I feel like there's got to be something in between this gentle parenting or conscious parenting, whereas oftentimes more than not just passive absentee parenting, like I'll let you do whatever you want.
Permissive parenting.
Permissive parenting, yeah.
Which doesn't help the child at all.
No, because then there's no bumpers on this bridge, right? Like, where is my safeguard? Am I safe? Who's in charge? It kind of creates a whole other can of worms. Yeah. But then also saying, well, you little tyrant, I'm going to go lock you in your room is not good either. So where is that happy medium? Like, what does healthy parenting look like in that scenario?
Well, for me, look, I have to be very conscious here that I'm not a parent.
Yeah.
So, anything I say about parenting is by definition me talking out of my ass.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't love quoting my dad too much because I'm not him, and
right.
Plenty of Gabor content online that people can find. But let me see what I can say about what you said. Jordan Peterson, we take some shots at him in the book. Not him, but especially his parenting. We have a lot to say about his particular approach to parenting. Now, I have a complicated, I come from the sort of liberal left side of the cultural divide or whatever. I don't really identify with any one part of it, but in terms of where I grew up, where I live, who my friends are, and all that. And Jordan Peterson is kind of a joke there, right? And I did kind of impersonate him. I did kind of his little Canadian Kermit voice for the audiobook.
Oh, did you?
Told me they enjoyed it. I did it lightly, So that quote, basically the thing he said on the podcast, he's written, Mm-hmm. I would never, and he says at one point, and we quote it in the book, I forget what it is, but like I could shut my daughter up, or I could basically shut her down with a withering glance, and he's proud of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably things about Jordan Peterson that I have blind spots about, because clearly he's doing a lot of good for a lot of people.
Yeah.
They seem to really find something in him. He's giving people a sense of direction, maybe a sense of pride. I saw someone post a meme that I thought was a little reductive, but that basically juxtaposing my dad and Jordan Peterson. And they actually have a lot of overlapping fans, which is interesting.
I'd love to see them talk.
Well, many people would. I don't know that it would ever happen,
mm-hmm.
but maybe, who knows? But that Jordan Peterson is the stern daddy and Gabor Maté brings the more maternal energy. I don't know about that. But certainly in terms of for adults, clean your room, stand up straight. Young men, believe in yourself, having something to say about the culture of grievance and an over-reliance on identity and all this kind of stuff. I can see how there's validity in that for people.
Absolutely.
I think he can also be cruel and uncompassionate and really bitchy, especially when he's talking about, groups that he has opinions about. But I'm not saying that everything he says has nothing to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the man probably has... Well, clearly, I think he sees some things and is pointing some things that are really resonating for millions of people. But as far as the parenting advice goes, he's going completely against actually what the science shows and what traditional parenting wisdom shows. To say that to train your kids to be likable, just think about that. Is that the role of a parent, to train the child to be likable? Well, that's the socialization model of parenting, that my job is to prepare them to be acceptable in the world, because that's his rationale for it. That if I don't like them, well, how is the world going to feel about them? Well, that assumes that that's a healthy goal of development, is to be likable and to fit in and to conform. Now, there's ways of teaching children appropriate social behavior that don't involve terrorizing them with the withdrawal of your love and being cold and being punitive and harsh, right? And emphasizing that you don't like them when they do that. That's not necessary. That's That's coming from somewhere else in him and in parents. That's coming from an intolerance of vulnerability or something. I mean, a child doesn't, because children don't get the message of your words. They feel the emotional energy. So if you say to a child, you go to your room until you come back and can behave in a way that I like, the child does not go away and say, huh, I guess it seems that I was behaving in a way that's probably not socially acceptable, and my parent is looking, they got the long view and they're trying to train me to, get along in the world, and I really appreciate that. No, they don't have that capacity. Children are narcissists. Everything's about them. I must not be lovable. Or, even more, angry children don't get loved. Sad children don't get included. Vulnerable children don't get cared for. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm in a dilemma. Like we said, I've got no power. I've got no leverage. None. I can't leave. I can't fight back. They're much bigger than me and louder. And they know everything. I'm just this little kid. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to suppress my emotions. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to push them even out of my own awareness. Then I'm going to become a nice person, a polite person, and I'm going to get along really well in the world. I'm going to conform super well. I'll be super likable. And then I'm going to end up with an autoimmune disorder or a mental illness or an addiction, because the energy that I stuffed down inside myself has to go somewhere. And there was a fracture in myself. The thing the child needs unconditionally and non-negotiably, this is not touchy-feely bullshit. This is just mammalian nature. You look at any mammal, is the attachment relationship with the parent. We need that to survive. We're the most helpless mammal at birth for the longest period of time. A horse can run on its first day of life. We're basically in an external womb for the first 9 months. Outside the womb, our brain is still developing at the same rate. You have babies,
Mm-hmm.
That takes a very safe container. And that doesn't stop when you learn how to walk. Even into the teenage years, there's still some attachment needs. And that's when those, cords get finally, ideally, snipped. Although you and me know that can take a lifetime. But if the parent uses that need of mine against me, if they leverage my need for them in order to control my behavior, what they're telling me is my behavior matters more than who I am. And your ability to love and accept me rests on whether I'm pleasing you rather than just me being who I am. Now, it's totally possible. Again, I'm not a parent, so this is much easier said than done, especially when you're stressed. And when there's relationship stress, forget about it. Work stress, societal stress, environmental stress. I mean, anything can drain a parent's ability to do this. But at least it's theoretically possible to say to a child, hey, you know what? That doesn't work when you do that, and here's why.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't let you do that because it's dangerous. Or I was really angry when you did that. Now you're teaching them about expressing emotions. But what you do when you're following Peterson's advice on this score is you're teaching children that they are conditionally likable, and they're going to internalize fundamentally that I'm never lovable, and you're setting them up for a whole lot of mishigas, as we say in Yiddish. I think that's a very toxic message, and I believe that he believes it, and if you believe that parenting is about behavior modification and control, the authoritarian model of parenting, then fine, do what it takes, but there are consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's what parenting is. Parenting is about bringing a child along so that they can mature into their authentic self. And when we do things as parents, again, I'm not a parent, that teach the child that part of their authentic self is leverageable and needs to be put away into cold storage, you're setting them up to be very unhappy and very confused and probably very resentful of you down the line. Or maybe they'll turn that loathing inward and harm themselves instead, because the idea of being angry at mommy and daddy is unthinkable. So
Wow.
that's what I would say about JP there. JVP,
Mm-hmm.
Clean your room? Yeah, clean your room. I could probably read 12 Rules for Life and get some things out of it.
For sure, yeah.
Put my mind to it, because there are ways in which I just have never taken care of certain, physical, financial things. And I could stand to grow up in that way, to sack up and, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. That's all good. But the parenting stuff, I think we have a pretty strong, I'll stand on what we're saying in this book against, his parenting advice any day of the week.
Yeah, it's really interesting Your examples ring true to me because our oldest is 3, and when there's some kind of behavior or expression that's happening that is not okay, whether it's like throwing, hitting, like these very toddler things that they're trying to explore and cause effect boundaries, all of these things. He can easily tell when we're pissed or frustrated, and then he'll be like, "Why are you not happy? I'm going to make you happy. I'll do." And I'm like, "No, no, no. You can't make me happy. That's my job." And then he still be like, I could tell hates disappointing us, hates making us like pissed or frustrated, and he'll be so concerned in that moment, and we have to stop no matter how mad we are, and we say, "Listen, we are mad, but I can love you when I'm mad. I can love you when I'm sad," and like explain to him no matter what my emotional state is, A, it's my job, and B, I love you no matter what. So you can hold anger and love at the same time.
Look at what you're teaching him.
Mhm.
Mixed emotions, complexity, being able to accept, oh, maybe he can be angry and love you, because I guarantee there's going to be tantrums where he's like, I hate you,
Mhm.
over some ice cream or some broccoli or something.
Yep. Mhm.
The ability to not, because what's going to happen in him if he thinks anger and love are mutually exclusive? Well, imagine the guilt and the shame he's going to feel at hating his parents sometimes. We have to hate our parents sometimes. It's just an emotion. But if these emotions get stuck, they wreak havoc with our physical and mental health. So what you're doing is freaking awesome.
Thanks.
I mean, take it from a non-parent. I mean, I would love to have been parented that way.
Yeah, and that's kind of how we try to frame it is, and I don't know if that's necessarily, we take his uniqueness into account, but it becomes very obvious where where my parents were lacking in that regard, because you do think at that young age, like, where did the love go all of a sudden? Like, it's just gone.
Must be my fault.
Must be my
That's
fault.
narcissism, healthy narcissism. Children go through that stage by definition. They can't not. Everything is about them.
But yeah, so if I locked him in that room by himself, he would think I'm not lovable right now. If we didn't take the time to explain, like, yes, I'm mad, but I still love you. In his little brain, he's thinking, Mom and Dad don't love me anymore.
If there's anyone who needs a timeout, it's you. Mommy needs to step aside until I can speak to you in a way that feels loving to you, because I don't want to talk to you in any other way. See, that's what it is to be an adult, a grown up. You don't pawn your dislike of your child off on them. Own it. You don't like it. Well, what don't you like about it? What are they showing you about yourself? What's that about? What's that? You're judging a 2-year-old for not being able to control their emotions?
Because you don't.
A 6-month-old for not being able to control their bowels.
Because you don't want to get a bad look in a restaurant.
Because you don't want to get a bad look in a restaurant. Because you were never allowed to feel your vulnerable feelings, probably. Not to therapize people who don't want to be therapized, but it's only the emotions in ourselves that we can't tolerate, or that we're punished severely, that we need to suppress in others when we have power over them. And that's one use of power. Another use of power is to empower. And I will quote my dad here, because I think this is a particularly nice little turn of phrase. He said, if you want to discipline your children, make them your disciples. That's where the word discipline comes from. Now, who would a disciple want to follow? Imagine if Jesus had been like, I'm not going to let any of my disciples behave in ways that make me don't like them. Did he ever not love people? That was the point. And that's what had people want to follow him. So I think that's great advice that I wish someone had told him when he was parenting me. But I'm very happy to see him, giving that advice to parents now, because I think it's a really important distinction, because we get so many ideas confused and conflated. Discipline, punishment, consequences. We use these words. We don't really think about what they mean. And we don't think about the emotional energy with which we're dispensing them. And what I love about what you're saying is there's just clearly a lot of conscious awareness and responsible choice making with you and your husband, and partnership too, because you need each other to be able to do that, and that, that has you be just aware in a way that so many parents historically, especially in stressful times, have had a hard time doing.
Imagine if we had vastly different parenting styles or philosophies, or disagreed on the basic principles of how to raise a child or cultivate a child. I don't know how that would even happen. Like, right, how would the household even function? So you have to start there, absolutely.
Right. Well,
Be on the same page.
like that old dude in Indiana Jones said, you have chosen wisely.
Yes. Yes, we did. I agree. There's not another one like him,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So when it comes to honoring like authenticity within ourselves, obviously there is a very real reality that the world does exchange with us and certain behaviors have almost a predictable effect. So it's like where are the bounds, or how do you define my true authenticity but also being able to function in society?
Sure. Well, look, and again, I talked about balancing on the bike, right?
Right.
So you could tip over to the side of suppression.
Mhm.
You could also tip over to the side of, well, I'm just being authentic. So what are you complaining about?
Right.
Get up. That was my authentic impulse to punch you in the face.
Right. That's not good.
Or kick you in the nuts. You know,
Yeah.
like, no, authenticity has nothing to do with doing whatever your impulses tell you to do. Authenticity, as we define it in the book, and this is my dad's definition. I think it's a good one. Number one, being in touch with our gut feelings, and it's also a survival need, just like attachment is. And we have a whole chapter about what happens when those two needs are pitted against each other. Attachment always wins because the child needs to be connected with the parents more than they need to be fully themselves. But it's also an important survival need. Imagine being one of our prehistoric ancestors out on the wild plains, and there's a leopard grazing somewhere, and we don't know how to sense it. We don't know how to trust any animal would be dinner.
Mhm.
So we have to know how to trust our gut feelings, and authenticity also, and then learning how to honor them in a responsible, choice-based way. So I can honor if I'm angry at you, well, yeah, one thing to do is to punch you, right?
Mhm.
Another thing to do is to yell epithets at you. Another thing to do is to take space for myself. Another thing to do is to say, I really didn't like that. I'm going to walk away. I mean, we have choices. Authenticity also, in fact, probably the more authentic choices are going to be the less reactive, violent ones, because authenticity also means knowing our values, knowing what we stand for. What kind of person do I want to be? What, and I think Jordan Peterson would like this word, character. Like,
Mhm.
I want to be a person of integrity and character, right? Which means, how would I want to so what does it mean for me to respond with integrity in a challenging situation? Well, that's part of authenticity too. Authenticity also means being able to feel the range of our emotions fully. And if I can't feel it in this moment, then in the next chance I get, I'm going to go process it. At least allowing myself to say, yes, I'm angry. Yes, I'm tired. Yes, I'm excited. Yes, I'm sad. Yes, I've had enough. And then to say no. Authenticity means the capacity to recognize I'm done, no, and then to find a way to communicate it that is, effective. And usually that's going to be the most respectful way, the cleanest way, right? Usually when we behave in shitty ways, we're not really resolving. We're putting more. We're like keeping the toxicity going, and we're going to have to deal with those consequences too. So I think it can be kind of a false dichotomy between, like, should I be authentic or should I be respectful and kind? No, you are
Both.
You can be both.
Mhm.
That's what we would all want for ourselves. I think alignment means keeping, and I use the concept of alignment in my mental chiropractic work. The metaphor of chiropractic. The mind is like the self is like a spine. And we have our thoughts and our feelings. We can be aware of them, and we can honor them and listen to them and consider them. But really, our intentions and our values are the things we want to align with, but not at the expense of, like, I'm not going to feel what I feel, or I'm going to pretend all the time, or I'm just going to act out my emotions instead of, because often when we act out our emotions, it's a way of not feeling them. We just outsource them onto everybody else. This is what abusers do.
Oh, interesting. So it's like instead of me feeling scared, vulnerable, X, I'm gonna inflict that on you. Almost.
100%.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could look at it a number of different ways. I hate the vulnerability in myself. I
Mhm.
see the fear in your face.
Mhm.
It makes me want to smash something. Well, I'll take the nearest available breathing thing.
Wow.
but also just on a more kind of um, just on the level of physics. I have energy I don't know how to contain. I hate how this feels. You're the closest thing to me. I'm going to call you the cause, and I'm going to get it out of me through you. Like, I'll be the lightning and you be the tree. Well, you can do that, but A, you're going to damage people, sometimes badly, sometimes permanently, and your relationships. You're not going to resolve the self-hatred. In fact, you're going to hate yourself more. And it's probably going to happen again until you deal with the pain underneath. So yeah, everything we're talking about in this book, the toxicity has to do with separating ourselves from the ability to sit with our own pain. Authenticity is also the ability to say, ouch, man, fuck, it hurts. And so many of us lose that ability. We learn to overcome it or be better than it or push it away or deny it or amplify it out of all proportion and try to get pity and sympathy and all that. But that's not really vulnerable pain. That's looking for fortifications because we don't have them in ourselves.
No, and I think that touches on something that you said a little bit earlier, which is respecting the journey of healing and not trying to skip straight to healed and being able to appreciate that transition from it's about me to understanding like this isn't my baggage, like that song. And I think that those steps are crucial because if you introduce material that people aren't ready for, then they don't see it the same way. It's like you can watch the same movie, but you weren't. Like it's how did you get this from that? And I've done that with certain book recommendations, specifically on epigenetics. Like it didn't start with you or the body keeps the score. And someone who wasn't ready for that material just kind of took it as okay, I'm healed because it's not mine. Like my grandfather was in the Holocaust and that's why I've got crippling anxiety and that's it. Like, you know what I mean? Like just jump to the end.
Yep.
So you have to let people process it at their own speed and then invest in the healing themselves. So you can't buy the book for them because they didn't invest in it. It's all of these things you want to help. And if you're at a different place, like almost a different if you look at it like a video game, you're just at a different level and you're looking down, you're like, I've got all the cheat codes. Let me give them to you. But then you're missing the whole point. So you
Absolutely. They're
can't.
going to get their asses kicked when they meet the final boss.
Exactly. So you can't do it. You just kind of have to just patiently wait.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
when it's happened that people have gotten people like bought other people as a gift, a walk with me, because literally I walk with people on the phone. I'm walking in Brooklyn or wherever I am. I was in Europe in January and I was doing walks with people there, but they were all over the world. We do it on the phone. So someone will say, I'm going to give this to my wife for her birthday. Well, if it's her birthday and she had asked for it, fine. But if someone's like, I want to give this to my son, I'll be like, okay, your son's chipping in $20.
I like that.
Your friend is going to put up an ante. You got to have skin in the game.
Mm-hmm.
You got to say, I want this. Because otherwise you might be doing it for somebody else, or you might be doing it with the attitude of okay, well, let me just see what happens, or oh, I need to fix myself or something like that. No, it takes us healing. What we say in this book is that healing wants something from us. It requires something from us. We're not doing it. It has a logic of its own. It's like a river that's flowing out to the ocean of wholeness and truth and peace and the universe or whatever. Like it's going there. We can either get on board or we can cling to a log and try to swim upstream. But you got to get in, and you got to participate in a certain way, and it takes something. And what you're saying is you can't do it for anyone else. And actually, I mean, anytime I have wanted to make someone else heal or transform or change their minds, it wasn't about them. I wasn't doing it for them. I was trying to make my life easier, or I was pushing away something in myself. I was trying to live vicariously through their transformation. And that's fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't help friendships, and that doesn't, and people can feel it when you're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you have to honor where people are, listen for what are they hungry for. And, there's a million books and courses and things, for anyone at any stage. I hope that this book has a lot of different entry points for people.
It's very,
Just be curious about society. You could be dealing with a life-threatening illness, anything in between. Hopefully it makes things more coherent for people in terms of understanding the connection between the world we're living in and the things that so many of us, if it's not ourselves, it's someone in our family or workplace or friends, are dealing with.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask, so it kind of ties into the different modalities of healing.
Yeah.
So your dad's been open about
Yeah.
psychedelics.
And
Oh,
I know you're interested in.
yeah, I'm so
Yeah.
interested. So I had a guest on, Matt Zeman, and he's in that space. My husband's kind of working in that space a little bit as well. So he was super excited when he heard you were coming to town. He's like, "Oh my gosh, doing such interesting things up in Canada," and obviously MAPS is up there.
Yes.
So have you used that modality? Are you open about that,
Yeah.
psychedelics? Can you kinda share your experience?
Yeah. Well, my story with psychedelics is a little bit complicated
Okay.
in that I married someone and then got divorced from that same person within a 2 year span, who was essentially my father's apprentice in the ayahuasca group therapy world.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, she and I led a retreat together down in Peru at a ayahuasca healing retreat center. I've done probably 40 or 50 ayahuasca ceremonies in my life.
Holy cow.
I've done MDMA in a psychotherapeutic context. I've done ketamine once,
Okay.
intramuscularly, which just took me. It was the most psychedelic thing I've ever. I mean, there was no me. It was just a space trip. I'm not even sure what happened. Maybe some neurons got rewired. It was kind of cool, but I don't really know how to talk about that experience. I'm no longer doing that. Not forever necessarily. I have nothing against it, and I certainly would speak and will right now speak highly of its potential. And I think for anyone who's curious about it or called to it, there's something there for you, for sure. Ayahuasca in particular is a very demanding teacher and healer. Talk about healing wanting something from you. Ayahuasca is not a passive, it's not a drug. You do not consume it and wait for it to do something to you. Ayahuasca is a living plant spirit. Now, I'm saying this as someone who doesn't particularly have any particular spiritual beliefs. You know, my scientific mind is kind of agnostic on the idea of gods and spirits and whatever, but having experienced what I've experienced, I don't think it's too much of a stretch for most of us to imagine that plants have intelligence.
Well, yeah, we know that
We know
almost now,
that. And
yeah.
we know that they have different qualities and different medicinal properties. It turns out that when you interact with some of these ancient plants that human beings have been learning from and working from, you really get that they know something we don't, and that they can unlock. Not they don't know it in the same way that we know it. They're not like little, you know. It's not like the human mind. It's a different way of knowing. But they can show us things that we can't see with our regular minds. And ayahuasca is a real kind of truth serum, but it's also a hall of mirrors because, you know, sometimes people will say, I had a bad ayahuasca trip. No, you didn't. You had a trip that you didn't know what to do with. It wasn't, I don't like to even saying trip. You had a journey. You had what's a synonym, trip, journey. You had a ceremony that was, you know, now some people, you know, you first of all, you absolutely have to do ayahuasca in the right context. There are charlatans out there. There are pseudo shamans who are, you know, giving people ayahuasca in lofts in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and putting on like deep house music or EDM or whatever the fuck, and then like leaving the room.
That does not seem like a good
No,
idea.
it's not. It's not a party drug. Now, some people, you can turn anything into a drug. You can turn anything into an addiction. You can turn anything can be unhealthy depending on the relationship to it, you know? So some people keep going back and back and back to the psychedelic world because they want to be in that peak state of oneness with everything. Well, sorry, man, you're supposed to actually, I think the curriculum is you're supposed to learn how to do that with the mind God gave you. You know?
Mm-hmm.
The plant's trying to show you something, not become your new crutch. If you do it with people who are really trained in the ancient medicinal ways, it's a medical system. These, you know, the vegetalismo, it's an intricate, complex, very detailed, um, rich tradition of working with plants to help clear people's energies, to help locate in the body and the mind stuck points, blocked areas, kind of black holes of trauma. And the shamans who, and of course, with the way Western capitalist culture has treated and continues to treat indigenous people, these ways of life are threatened and these ways of knowledge are threatened. So it's a compromised thing now that, you know, us Westerners can go and like have an ayahuasca holiday go on an ayahuasca spa retreat or whatever. In a way, it's good that it's available to us. In another way, we have to be mindful that even the way we approach the medicine is going to affect the way we experience it. But in the ideal circumstance, and there are really good places, I think, and even people here in North America doing it responsibly. And I've had many incredible ceremonial experiences, and some of the hardest moments of my life were in ayahuasca ceremonies. You're going to see things about yourself. And I heard one of your guests say that you have to have a strong intention going into a ceremony. I think her name was it Mia?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. Something to bring yourself back to. Why am I doing this? Because what's going to happen is that you're going to be thrown into a space where all of your reference points are scattered. It's very hard to locate sometimes yourself. You're going to be remembering things, seeing things, hearing things. The chanting is going on. It's synesthetic. You'll be seeing colors. You'll be going through intense body sensations, sometimes purging, vomiting, beyond. You cannot control it. And, I heard her and you talk about, having a fear of loss of control. Me too. And one of the things ayahuasca taught me first off the bat at my first 2 ceremonies was, that's how you live your life, buddy. And school's in session.
Wow.
You can fight me if you want, but I'm going to make you suffer. Not because I hate you, because I want what you really want for yourself. I want it more than you do. You're trying to have it your way. You're trying to have it be comfortable and nice. I'm showing you what's in you so that you can get it out of you. And so learning how to vomit even was a big learning for me, actually. Learning how to let go and let, just like trust, actually, that on the other side of that. And I noticed the way I hold on to my pain. It's a metaphor for that. Not even a metaphor. It's literally that I keep down things that are toxic because I don't want to let go of control. Well, that's my mind running my life. And you really get to sit with yourself in a very clear mirror. And then sometimes you have nights that are totally confusing, and it takes some conversation, maybe some group therapy or some integration.
I was going to ask about the integration process.
Integration is key.
Mm-hmm.
It's key. And I would say that maybe that was something that was sometimes missing in my experiences with it, especially during my marriage, where I got kind of swept up into the culture of it to kind of keep up with the woman I married. And I lost touch with myself in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it was especially complicated because she was a disciple of my father's and an apprentice of his. Can you imagine? Some, Robin Thicke got nothing on these blurred lines. So it was, so that left me with a certain taste in my mouth of, okay, I need to step away from that because that medicine taught me a lot. And I've been enjoying since then. And you know what it is? Actually, the time since then, I haven't done it in 3 or 4 years. I'm still integrating it. And I'm learning how to have these realizations and remember what would the medicine say in this moment? Because it stays with you. It's not like I'm high and then I'm not high. No, it's a presence. It shows you something you can't unsee. Well, you can cultivate that. You can be like, okay, well, part of me woke up there. Can I marshal that? Can I bring that to bear in this difficult moment? And the more I can do that, the more I feel like, yeah, the next time I meet ayahuasca, I'm going to be much more like, like an avatar. I see you, like sort of like being able to connect with it rather than like pray and begging for help. And although there's nothing wrong with that either. I don't know. I'm kind of going off here because, that was an upsetting part of my life. And I don't know that I've fully healed from that. And maybe it'll take me going back to Peru and doing an ayahuasca ceremony at the scene of the crime to fully resolve it. I'm not there just yet. But I will say that, among the most powerful paradigm shifting things I've ever done has been those things. So if someone feels the call, I would say follow it. If someone doesn't feel the call, forget it. Mm-hmm. It's not something to force yourself to do. It's not something to evangelize about for other people.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think as we see it getting more and more popular, that's the concerning bit for me. So I've only done psilocybin one time. It wasn't as life-changing and visual as I've heard other people, but I truly believe everything happens as it's supposed to happen, so I got what I needed out of it.
What was the context? Was it recreational or ceremonial?
Ceremonial. So that's the other thing too, is I think that their context is huge, and I've said this in other podcasts. I think that doing something like you're in a loft and putting on house music and you're just like just free for all, I don't know that that is necessarily going to do more good than harm. But I don't know because I've never done ayahuasca. I
Make
just
someone some money.
right. So you kind of have to look at all the cues around the context and if this is like an authentic experience that you should be having or if this is something else and you're just trying to be able to post it on Instagram and be like, I'm this really cool, in touch, enlightened person. I'm gonna go see God, God tonight.
That's the danger of the whole Instagram healing world, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because it turns into a new brand. Even authenticity can turn into a new flavor of Coke. Now we want to be like that person. We want to be able to post that story of triumph and whatever. And it becomes, our healing becomes something for other people to consume so that we can now feel better about ourselves. And of course, the flip side of that is, how did you and me even meet? Because we're both on Instagram talking about things that are aligned and compatible, and we're having this conversation. So the social media in themselves are neutral. But with psychedelics, with healing, with anything, the question is who's doing it? What's the context? Who's running the show? Is it the ego? Is it the profit motive? Is it, my public image? Or is it following that inner call towards what's gonna help me take the next step towards my own wholeness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like what is your specific goal? Yeah, but I've seen people that try to coax other people and they're like, oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And I'm like, if they're not ready, that is the last thing you want to do is send them there, which is interesting because I have some family members that are getting curious about it. And I'm like, they're like, "Can you, introduce us to your shaman and all of this?" And I'll just ignore them. And it's kind of like certain religions where you kinda have to beat down the doors several times before it opens because 'cause they're like, "How bad do you actually want this? You have to prove that you actually want this." And then I'll give them a docuseries. I'm like, "Well, this will give you more context." And, I mean, it's been probably over a year, and I still haven't given them what they're asking for. And I'm just like, I just don't know. I really wanna know that you're ready because it can be a very big deal, and with this example, one of the partners is kind of trying to pressure the other one into doing it. I'm like, "That's not good," and, like, she's gotta be ready, and it's gotta be her decision to do it, otherwise, that you guys are not gonna make it after the ceremony.
Look, we live in a culture that's always trying to sell us the next answer.
Yes.
Ayahuasca is not going to solve shit for you.
No.
It's not. It may dissolve some stuff. I don't call myself a problem solver. I'm a problem dissolver. Maybe I learned that from ayahuasca. You have to be able to see through the thing. But we always want to let's just get rid of it. If someone's going to go into ayahuasca with the intention of, one of the nice ways that people sometimes frame their intentions in an ayahuasca ceremony is show me XYZ or teach me about, like actually kind of a humble request. It takes a lot of humility of the plant, of the spirit, or whatever, your higher self. You could, anything you want to call it. So let's say someone says, show me about, the pain underneath my addiction. Well, it's very different than saying, cure my addiction. If you go in saying, cure my addiction, you're going to have a miserable time. It's not about cure, it's about healing, it's about understanding. And then you get to integrate that, and then the behaviors will, your physical life can alter, but you can't, there's no meme. It's not a meme. Healing is not something you can screen capture and reshare to your stories. It's visceral, to use the word you used. It's full contact. It's unpredictable. It's beyond the human. And, but part of our humanity is being able to tap into it and find out where it's trying to lead us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And there's multiple modalities to get to the same place. So you can do different forms of meditation to still have a psychedelic effect and to still kind of create that fresh powder on your brain so that you don't have those deep habits and mental habits that we have, negative self-talk, all of these things.
And I've had people tell me at the end of my mental chiropractic sessions with them that they felt like they just took some kind of cleansing drug. And I said, good, I just brainwashed you. But in the best sense, a good scrub.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had this conversation with my father that I mentioned, the sort of paradigm shifting one, we all felt like, whoa, we just sat through a ceremony, because something came out of, like, I realized I had gone through like such anger and grievance, and I was just so, and then shut down, and then something crystallized with such clarity that I just kind of channeled it, and I was able to speak it, and it was something that needed to be said between us. And he needed to hear it, but I hadn't had the language. And all of a sudden I had the language. And it was about, he had been angry at me, just to bottom line it. He had been saying, I'm not responsible for your wounds, Daniel. I'm not responsible. Like, I'm sorry. I wish I'd been a better father, but stop making me responsible for your wounds. I'm like, Dad, I know you're not. I know you're not. You're missing my point. And he just kept hammering on this, because clearly his experience is he has this toddler who won't, in a grown man's body. And I was able to, sitting with myself, I realized, no, your dad, you're not responsible for my wound, but you are connected to it in a way that no one else in the world is. And that's just the way it is. It's just the physics of it. You were there, like I said. And when you're around, it's harder for me. It's more confusing for me to know what to do with it. So if you want to be in a close relationship with me, I just need you to know that. And you don't need to be responsible for the wound. You don't even need to help me, but you could try not to make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
And you could get off your defensive high horse and just be empathetic, even park the sympathy, like, I'm so sorry for you. No, just be curious, because I'm really trying to own it.
Yeah.
And I want to have a relationship with you where I can see you for who you are now. But if you're going to see me for who I am now, know that I'm someone who's dealing with something that will never not be connected to you. It's not your fault. And somehow, and there was a bunch else, but that was the essence of it. And when things get that crystal clear, we all, the two of us and our friend who was mediating, all felt like, so, long way of saying, psychedelics, like you're saying, I'm just agreeing with you, are one avenue to that kind of clarity. And for many people, it's an important jumpstart, because sometimes our minds get so stale, so locked in patterns, so in the groove, that it takes an external intervention, really, to break out of it. But at a certain point, I would think that the goal for us, especially us Westerners, who are not living in a cultural context where we really have a deep relationship to these plants,
Mm-hmm.
I think at a certain point we really want to export their lessons into our everyday lives, rather than continuing to rely on them and making it about the plant and about the psychedelics and about the thing and about the product and this and that. It's about us.
Yeah, and avoid being the tourist.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, or if you are the tourist, at least admit it and see what you can do to be the most conscious, responsible, humble tourist possible.
Mm-hmm. Because that is one of the consequences that you do see is from the Taurus is the super ego that comes in, and then it's you're all knowing, and then that's a really unshakable personality and kind of place to be.
Well, and of course, the flip side of that is, all the sensationalist headlines about abuse happening at these retreat centers and tourists getting played and taken advantage of. Well, that's what happens in the free market. You know what I'm saying? When something gets desacralized,
Mm,
when something sacred gets turned into a commodity,
right.
there's going to be room for all kinds of mischief. And it happens with everything. So it's not like indigenous people are like saints who would never, there are some shady practices down there, but they're working within the system they're working in. It's like my favorite show, The Wire. Like, the game is rigged. Everyone's playing the game inside the game of global capitalism and exploitation, and we have so much more than they do, and we're going down there and saying, hey, please give us your most sacred teachings. I'm going to be here for a week, and then I'm going to go home and go back to being a CEO of the company that's like raping your rainforest or whatever. I'm just kind of riffing here, but you know what I'm saying? Like, we have to. This book is all about the relationships, that the web of relationships that we're a part of, and we don't often think about that. But we in the West are in a relationship with the rest of the world, and me who lives in a coastal liberal city is in a relationship with the people who live in North Carolina and West Virginia, the people who, the parts of the country we like to call flyover country, what terrible bigoted phrase that is, you know. I think we ignore those relationships at our own peril and detriment, and to the detriment of the world, for sure.
Yeah, it does a really great job at highlighting the interconnectedness of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's, your childhood, the society, culture, diet, your health, all of these things are one container.
Yeah.
And if one or multiple facets are off, then everything kind of ends up in disease or, lack of mental clarity and unregulated emotions, all of these things. So you guys kind of hit, as you can see with the thickness, you guys hit all of the buttons in my mind. I guess one of the questions that kept coming up for me is you seem to have like this freedom in being able to express your story and just like this raw honesty that I think is beautiful. Do you have conversations as to how much is allowed to be public and how much is just for your guys' relationship to kind of be sorted privately?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that just you can kind of gauge that internally and know the bounds, or are there bounds?
Well, it's been trial and error. I think between my dad and I, there's a fairly open channel. I recently, on a live stream actually, we're doing a live stream on like a political podcast that a friend of mine has, and we're talking about the book, and he was talking about his parenting, and I said, Dad, I'm this close to revoking your license to talking about the specifics of my trauma in public. And I was half joking, but I was
Yeah.
serious. It's not that I don't want him to talk about his parenting. That's his parenting. But the things that happened to me, the specific incidents, the moments, like there's this story that, he's often told. It's the one he always goes to, where he hit me across the face at age 3 because I wouldn't sing him happy birthday in front of the entire extended family. We are not a family where hitting happens.
Oh, that makes me so sad.
Completely beyond the pale. And it was the one time he ever laid hands on me.
Yeah.
There may have been some spanking, but that was the one time there was ever that kind of hitting. And I was humiliated, and I was shocked, and I was terrified, and I was furious. I was very heartbroken, and the whole family was just horrible, And, imagine what it's like to I'm on Instagram, I'm scrolling, and a reel pops up that's, nicely edited and clipped together of my dad telling that story, on my phone there, in between some dude playing the clarinet and, a chicken dancing with a squirrel. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And I think for a long time I was sort of like, oh, ha ha ha. Isn't the Maté family amusing? Oh, it's so interesting being me. And at a certain point I was like, fuck this. This is too much. I have my limits. So yeah, I there are certain stories that I'm like, Dad, that's not yours to tell anymore. You're going to have to, do your mea culpas without dining out on my pain like that so specifically, and he got that, and so that's fine. In the other direction, he's never asked me not to say anything. I mean, I think what's incumbent upon me, and you can maybe see me doing it in real time, trying to, keep the balance, is to not use my public platform to puff myself up at his expense. Which, if you look at our videos from our Hello Again workshops, there are moments where I'm clearly enjoying the fact that people are now watching. Because when I was a kid, I would have loved if there were bleachers around the kitchen table. You're like, are you guys seeing that? But now I can kind of do that, like a little wink, wink to the audience, whatever. No, that's fine. It's going to happen when we're together. It's part of the workshop. It's part of the dynamic. It's okay. It's pretty benign. But in interviews, there's probably part of me that wants to go off on him, So I need to be responsible for that. That's not content. That's context. As far as the rest of the family, yeah, that's off limits. I'm not going to talk about my siblings. I'm not going to talk about my mom in the same way. I think I do have some leeway from her to talk about it, but I'm rarely asked about her, which is interesting. But that's because my dad and I are the ones who have made a little business out of putting our stuff on Front Street, showing people what is up with us, and like you said, hopefully doing people a service by. And now people talk about our courage. For us, it doesn't take courage. We're both exhibitionists. We both it's easier for me not to hide it. I love creating a context for myself where I don't have to, where people want to hear about it. I truly love it. The challenge, though, is not thinking that the healing is going to happen, when I'm chatting with Candice or when he's on the Joe Rogan show.
Right.
No, the healing happens when we're off camera. But us sharing about it, I think we've learned that people get a lot of value out of it. What's amazing, though, I don't know if you've seen the comments under some of these videos and reels. A lot of people react very intensely and in very, very different ways to the same clip. I could be talking about accepting that our parents may never change. And I got some people being like, who is this spoiled, entitled brat? Do you know how much good your father's done in the world? Maybe he wants you to change. You ever thought of that? I got someone else being like, you're being way too easy on parents. You're saying I have to have a relationship with my mother, whatever. Under our videos on YouTube, some people are like, Daniel is a spoiled brat. He clearly hates his father. I don't know why Gabor puts up with this. This is beneath him. Other people are like, I'm never going to read another Gabor Maté book again. Look at what he just did to his son. And they give the timestamp, of some look he gave me or something he said to the audience. And you know what, Candice? The truth is, they're all correct. Everyone's picking up on different things through the filter that they're listening through. And that's the great thing about it. So I don't actually have to take it personally. I'm glad people get so much out of it. But, we may have just stumbled into the biggest niche in the world. This topic, everyone deals with it. No one's talking about it. There are no books about it. Very few, at least. How many parenting books are there?
Countless.
How many books are there about letting go of your dying parents? What about all the decades in between? We don't think to think about it because it's optional. And it's kind of just in stasis. It's in a holding pattern. We're fully cooked, whatever. I'm an adult. You did what you did. I'll see you at Thanksgiving. But what if we were to examine it? And just to be clear for people, our book and our workshop, and the book isn't written yet, but our work on this topic doesn't require that people necessarily have a willing partner or cohort. So like if you're not in touch with your parents, I want you to still be able to get something out of this, because ultimately the relationship is only about 20% of what's happening between you and me. 80% of it's happening in here and over there, right? So my relationship to the relationship is the thing that I can work on.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's going to be really interesting moving forward for a lot of people because of this content economy. Like so many people are, creating businesses out of essentially themselves and their identity and their brand or their family dynamic or whatever it is. And I think we have these new questions that we have to ask, which is how much am I allowed to share? Like who makes those rules? What's within the bounds? Yeah, and I just like selfishly I wonder that too, because I'm always trying to figure out how much of my life do I get to share and about my kids and all of that, because I don't want them to get older and like, man, that wasn't yours to tell.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so I don't even post their faces online and people are like, who do you think you are? It's like, it's not about me at all. I don't think that I'm Kim Kardashian and stop the paparazzi. By no means do I think that.
You're erring on the side
Right.
of their integrity.
Right. And I want that to be their decision if they want to be on social media, like a simple thing like that. You know what I mean? So I think there's so much nuance to how we parent right now and what we share. So I'm just so curious of how that's going to unfold in the future.
Definitely. And if I was to, by some miracle, and I think I've come to the place where I can admit that I want to have kids, although, at age 47, I'm like, well, if I take this long to bloom, is it going to happen? But, it's scary. It would totally change my life in ways I can't even imagine. But if I had kids, well, there'd be a whole new wrinkle, about my public profile. What's amazing is I never, ever expected to be out here in public talking about this stuff. This collaboration has opened that up, and it turns out I like it, and I have a lot to say. But I'm still writing musicals, and I'm still doing these mental chiropractic walks, and so I don't know how long I'm going to be a content creator or influencer, which are words I just
I hate the word influencer too.
Hitler was an influencer.
Oh God. Yeah, we have to figure out something else.
Yeah.
Another descriptor. Yeah. Content creator, digital creator. Something.
Person with a platform.
Yeah.
Person talking.
Well, before we get to these super chats, this was awesome. Do you want to tell everyone where they can follow you, how they can support you, anything you're working on?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my mental chiropractic service is called Take a Walk with Daniel, and the website is walkwithdaniel.com. And I do like a free consult if anyone wants to ask questions about it, because it's kind of a weird concept. Mental chiropractic, walking, but I can break it down for you real easy. And the idea is, if something in your life is stuck, we have a walk that takes an hour and 15 or an hour and 40. It's not therapy. I'm not trying to see you next week. We're going to get unstuck today. So it takes a lot of intention, which gives me a lot of license to be very straight with you, very, direct, which I like. I'm not going to sit there and be like, oh, okay, tell me about your childhood. I'm like, no, I get it. You were traumatized. So was I. All right. Now, how is that showing up now?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a little taste of what that is. If people are curious about my songwriting and my musical theater work, danielmatte.com has links to all my, my YouTube channel and lots of great Broadway actors singing my stuff. And my podcast, yes. Let's Get Lyrical with Carice and Daniel, not to be confused with another podcast called Let's Get Lyrical, which is it's also about lyrics, but I only found out that they existed like the night before we dropped, so I added our names to it. But they were very nice, and they didn't make a fuss about that. But yeah, me and Carice Van Houten from Game of Thrones. She was also in. She played Tom Cruise's wife in Valkyrie, and she's done a lot of great stuff. Great Dutch actress. We just nerd out about song lyrics every week, from like Slayer to Joni Mitchell to De La Soul to whatever. And we have a live stream coming up on the 28th. Maybe I'll tease this now. Maybe I'll actually say we have Leanne Rimes.
Oh, I love her.
Yeah.
Cool.
Because of the book.
Very cool.
And so excited to do a stream on lyrics Leanne loves, and find out which lyricists really turn her crank. So that'll be on Tuesday, February 28th. So yeah, just you can follow us on Instagram. That show, the Instagram handle is at Carice and Daniel Get Lyrical, and my Instagram handle is at Daniel B as in Brooklyn Maté, Mate.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and what a unique podcast. I love that idea.
Well, it's something that we're both passionate about.
Yeah.
I can talk about song lyrics forever. I'm constantly quoting them, always free associating. And they contain so much, and I think if I have an activist cause in the world, I want to create a world where no one has to say, oh, I don't listen to the lyrics. No, listen to the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
There's something in it for you. It might ruin the song for you, but you might get even more out of it. And there's, like I said, when we played Suzanne Vega, My Name is Luca, for my dad. He was like, this was a pop song on the radio when you were a kid. Did you understand it? I said, yeah, Dad, I knew what physical abuse was. Pop music is layered and complex. And what's crazy is, I could say, okay, boomer to him, but okay, Xer, I was all ready to write off Billie Eilish, but then someone sent me a song of hers. I forget what it was called, but it was a breakup song. I was like, geez, this is layered. That surprised me, Every generation has things going on in their lyrics that are teaching them about themselves and that are, look, there's some toxic shit in pop music for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of really healthy self-expression too. And I love the innovations, and I'm a huge hip hop fan. I'm a former finalist for the Hip Hop Karaoke Championship of New York City. Twice I was a finalist.
Oh, wow.
But I wasn't.
You can throw down.
I can throw down. And if you want to see, here's another thing.
I do want to see.
So go to YouTube and search Hip Hop Karaoke New York City RDJ. And can you guess what RDJ stands for? It was my stage name.
Robert Downey Jr. Yeah, you look a lot like him.
They bestowed that name upon me the first time I came. So yeah, I did Jay-Z, I did Wu-Tang, I did Busta Rhymes. It was a great, great time back when those events existed. But anyway, lyrics. I love lyrics, and I write lyrics, and we love talking about it. Me and Carice.
Awesome. Jamie, do we have any super chats?
No, just some chats in general.
Just chats in general. Did you see any questions that you wanted to hit?
Yeah. My father left my mother last week after 37 years of marriage. What can you say to help her?
Whoa.
To help her? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't presume to say anything. I don't know anything about the situation. I would just say, I'm sorry, that's really rough. Yeah, I mean, I would have to know so much more to know how to say anything remotely helpful. And I would say to the person who wrote it, I hope you're doing okay. And even if you're a grown up and not living with them, that's a shock to the family system, And I hope it's for the best. I hope that some healing comes out of it. That's all I can say.
All right, there's a guy named Mountain Climber. He says this whole conversation was therapy for him.
Oh,
I love that.
good.
That's why I like these lives, is sometimes you get like live feedback and you don't feel like you're shouting into a void. You're like, no, someone's listening and really getting something from this. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Mountain Climber. I'm really glad.
Yeah.
Also, make sure you guys shout out Georgia and Guam. Both are watching.
Hey, Georgia. Hey, Guam.
You mean the
geographical
countries?
location.
Oh, well, that too.
Guam in the house, Georgia in the building.
You can go to chattingwithcandice.com. That has all the socials and previous episodes. I hope that you enjoyed this. You can also go to buymeacoffee.com/Candice if you want to contribute to the podcast. You can help me buy plane tickets and get amazing guests like Daniel again. So thank you, everybody. If you did not hit like and subscribe, make sure you do that before you sign off, and we'll see you next time.